I have talked about the end of the Soviet Union as being relatively peaceful, but relatively peaceful is not entirely peaceful. Several conflicts broke out in the aftermath of Soviet collapse, and that's what I'll be talking about in this video. Just want to note that I'm going to talk about events in this video. Please see the separate videos on ethnic conflict for a discussion of broader causes. I'm also not going to be talking about Ukraine in this video, simply because those conflicts, Crimea and eastern Ukraine, emerged not in the immediate aftermath of the end of the Soviet Union, but in 2014. The roots may be similar, but the dynamics are very different, and this video is too long, so I'll talk about them separately. While these conflicts all have different origins and timings, they are generally grouped under the name frozen conflicts, because after they flared up, ceasefires were declared, and these conflicts remained mostly in this status, unresolved but without active regular fighting. The first and most notable of these conflicts is the war between Armenia and Azerbaijan over Nagorno-Karabakh. Under the Soviet Union, Nagorno-Karabakh was an autonomous region within the Republic of Azerbaijan. Conflict began before the end of communism, in 1988, when Nagorno-Karabakh's Soviet, that's their council, petitioned to be administratively unified with the Soviet Republic of Armenia. A huge number of Armenians in Armenia's capital, Yerevan, demonstrated in support of unification, which culminated in a protest of around 300,000 people. These February 1988 protests were some of the biggest mass protests ever in the Soviet Union. After pogroms against and deportations of Armenians in Azerbaijan took place over the next year, the Soviet central government forcibly intervened in January 1990, sending the military to take control over Azerbaijan's capital, Baku. The war began later in 1990 as Armenians formed militias and began to take territory, forcing out ethnic Azerbaijanis from Karabakh. By the time a ceasefire was declared in May 1994, Armenians occupied 7 former Azerbaijani districts in addition to most of the territory of Nagorno-Karabakh. Armenia could not get international recognition for expanding its borders, so the new territory declared independence as the unrecognized Republic of Artsakh. We'll talk more about the aftermath when we discuss regional security at the end of this semester, but to sum up, Azerbaijan was able to leverage its much stronger economic resources, oil, into years of purchases of advanced weaponry and won a decisive victory in a new offensive in September 2020. As part of a Russian-negotiated ceasefire, Armenia agreed to return control of the 7 districts to Azerbaijan and accepted Russian peacekeepers within Nagorno-Karabakh itself. Just wanted to make one note on this conflict. While Armenians are Christian and Azerbaijanis Muslim, this war was never really cast in religious terms. This is partly because Azerbaijanis are mostly secular, particularly so in Soviet times, and partly because ethnicity was the more important dividing line. Azerbaijani is a Turkic language, and the contemporary origins of Armenian nationalism lie in the Armenian genocide of 1950 to 23 that took place in what is now eastern Turkey. The next conflict on the timeline was Transnistria, a breakaway territory from Moldova. The region gets its name because it is on the other side of the Dniester River from the rest of Moldova. The region is primarily Russian-speaking, while the rest of the country primarily speaks Moldovan, which is related to Romanian. The geographic origins of this conflict actually arise in the interwar period, when most of Moldova was part of Romania, and the border between Romania and what is now Ukraine was the Dniester River. Conflict began in 1989 when the Moldavian SSR adopted Moldovan as its official language. After targeted violence against ethnic Russians in 1990, a war took place between November 1990 and July 1992. The breakaway region continues to seek unification with Russia. Moving to Georgia, the first conflict there was in South Ossetia. Ossetia is divided between North and South, with North Ossetia being in Russia. While they are co-ethnics, the only actual link between the two regions is the strategically important Roki Tunnel, one of only 3 roads that cross the central North Caucasus. I do want to note that I'm actually not quite sure how to pronounce this name. I have heard it both Ossetia and Ossetia. In Cyrillic, it's written with a T, so I'm going to go with Ossetia. So I admit to having a hard time understanding why this war happened, and felt better when I read that Eduard Shevardnadze, who was a former Soviet foreign minister and Georgia's 2nd president, he described this war as the most senseless and pointless war in the history of Georgia. It started when local South Ossetian leaders expressed interest in closer ties with North Ossetia, and Georgian militias responded with military attacks. A ceasefire was declared in June 1992, and the conflict has mostly been quiet since then. As with the The Abkhaz are one of many small ethno-linguistic groups in the Caucasus. Abkhazia itself might be best known as the location of lovely Black Sea coastal cities and the Khudori Gorge, which is one of the best tourist attractions in Georgia. Their contemporary national roots lie in a rebellion against the Russian Empire in the 1860s and a Soviet policy of forced Georgianization under Stalin, who was ethnically Georgian. Abkhazia was an autonomous republic within Soviet Georgia with a diverse local population. In the early 1990s, Abkhaz and Georgian citizens were both being mobilized along national lines, but war didn't break out until August 1992, after the ceasefire in South Ossetia. The head of the Georgian National Guard then took his forces to the capital of Abkhazia, with unclear authorization, prompting an Abkhaz response. The resulting war was short but brutal, with more reports of atrocities against civilians, such as torture and rape, than in Ossetia or Karabakh combined. In the end, almost the entire pre-war ethnic Georgian population fled to Georgia proper. The republic was formally recognized by Russia, but no other countries, in 2008, after their cooperation during that year's war between Russia and Georgia. I want to conclude by touching on conflicts that did not happen in the early 1990s. One of the biggest concerns at that time was the status of Russian-speaking minorities, particularly in the Baltics and Kazakhstan. Those were places where the Russian population was both large in size and geographically concentrated. This did not lead to irredentist movements, however, due in part to guarantees of political rights by these Republican governments. Instead, both regions have seen significant Russian outmigration. While Russian speakers made up about 40% of Kazakhstan's population in 1989, they are around 20% today. Much in the same way, expected ethnic conflict in the Fergana Valley never really emerged. The Fergana Valley is the part of Central Asia where the borders get all tangled up with each other. The valley itself is primarily in Uzbekistan, but it's shared with Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan. It's a very ethnically diverse region, with Uzbeks primarily living in the valleys and Kyrgyz and Tajiks in the surrounding mountains. While the region has seen violence, notably ethnic riots in Osh in 1990, the violent suppression of protests in Andijan in 2005, and more ethnic violence in Osh and Jalalabad in 2010, none of this actually escalated to war. Instead, the civil war that did occur in Central Asia was in Tajikistan between 1992 and 1997. This was not an ethnic war, but a war between political factions and regional clans. Tajikistan is divided between the north, in the Fergana Valley, and the mountainous south, with the south further divided by local affiliations. The war was primarily between the former Communist Popular Front, which was affiliated with partisan clans in the north and received Russian support, and on the other side was the United Tajik Opposition, which is based in Gorno-Badakhshan. The UTO grew more Islamicized over time, receiving support both from the Northern Alliance in Afghanistan, their fellow Tajiks, as well as some Iranian support. While this was the most serious of the post-Soviet conflicts, it doesn't get lumped in with the frozen conflicts, both because it didn't fit the story of ethnic nationalism and because it isn't actually frozen. A peace agreement was reached in 1997. So that was my not-so-quick overview of post-Soviet conflicts. We'll discuss further in class.